All right, so this is a Dennis. He's running for mayor of Washington, D.C. So Dennis, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Party. And my background, to go into that to begin with. And first of all, I'd like to thank you, Elliot, for taking the time to interview me here. And I really appreciate getting out and get the word out. What we have to say, our group, is a little unusual, so you're not going to hear the run-of-the-mill claptrap that you hear from a lot of other people
Oh,
there.
good.
Right. So my background is I taught political science in college. Um, and after that, I got involved in government consulting work, doing research on social problems. And following that, I became a political activist, working very hard for decriminalization in the areas of drugs, sex, etc. Among our accomplishments, when we started out, there were so many things that were illegal. Marijuana, people were putting in jail left and right for that. For gay activity, the police were setting up people in men's rooms. We go back to that point and remember, the fear and concern that we all had back then. And we accomplished quite a bit in decriminalizing a lot of this. There's still much more to go on this, but that is what my position is all about. Uh, uh, and I also have family who's been very active too. I have a son, for example, who is a director of the DC Bar Association. And in his role there, he's training lawyers to be more concerned about the consequences of legislation. In other words, it's often said that the lawyers who are responsible for our laws in this country uh, put these laws out so they can get more work. In other words, if they can criminalize more activities, whether it's drugs or sex, they have more people to represent and defend in court. It reminds me a little bit of preachers who uh, who who try to instill guilt in people and yet give them the opportunity through grace to get rid of the guilt. So you kind of create the problem and then you create the means to overcome the problem.
Right.
I know we're getting a little philosophical here, so let
No,
me
it's
get
interesting.
let me more details. At any rate, my son has been very instrumental, and he was caught up, by the way, in the beginning of this, and was arrested for both helping his mother with an escort service that she had, as well as his sister, my mother's sister, with a marijuana business. So before the age of 21, he had felony conviction. And at that point, he came to me and he said, Dad, we can't change the law from the outside. We have to do it from the inside. So I'm going to become a lawyer. And he did that. And he has a landmark case where he was allowed to become a lawyer, to pass the bar, which he did on the first try, and be admitted despite 2 felony convictions. So because they recognize that these were victimless crimes and so many people are suffering from this. So my whole position is we need to get the government out of our bedrooms. We need to get them out of our personal lives. We should not legislate morality. And the whole idea of the Libertarian Party is that we want less regulation and more personal choice. If you look in Washington, D.C. now, and in many other cities, most other cities, you're going to see tents all around the place, tent cities. People basically are rebelling against the lack of housing, the lack of opportunities for employment, and it's all due to excessive regulation. For example, in Washington, D.C., the government has set a limit on not being able to build more than 10 stories high. They don't want it to interfere with the monuments in the city. That is creating a situation where there was just no housing available and people are tenting on streets. So if you go through Washington, you're going to see a barbaric situation here. People are rebelling. And we say, our group, let's get rid of most of the regulations here that deal with personal choice, personal lives, and opportunities for people to live and work where they want. So this is much of what our party is all about. And beyond that, if you look at the trends in crime and murder rate in the city, you'll find that they're extremely high, and they're getting higher and higher each year. And this is due again, harping back on over control by government. When you make drugs illegal for people, for adults to use, to buy, you create an underground market. And when you create that market, the people who are involved in this trade cannot go to court to resolve disputes. They must resolve those disputes on the street with guns and with other direct action. And this is why we have so much violence. And basically, it breeds a contempt for all laws and all citizens. So nobody is really safe anymore. You walk down the street and you don't know what to expect, and particularly at nighttime. So this is part of our concerns and what we intend to do about it, and basically reduce the government regulations that exist out there and give people an opportunity to make their own way. Do you have any questions?
Well, first of all, yeah, I think that's, you have a lot of really good ideas, and that is something, I hadn't heard about that. I've interviewed a lot of people from DC. I hadn't heard about that 10
Yeah,
source limit law, and that totally makes sense. That
yeah, yeah,
why not just keep building up if there's nowhere else, if there's nowhere to build on the
right, right,
So yeah. So I guess one of the last things you talked about was getting the government out of making drugs legal, making, victimless crimes essentially legal, is it seems
yes,
to be your position. So
right,
how would you say, just so that, our platform, what we'll probably have is like a public safety bar, right? And so
right,
I will put, make victimless crimes legal, or
yes,
something like that. And then
yeah,
I'll go into that a little bit. So I
yeah.
guess to help me out, could you go into a little bit more about what you would like public safety to look like in DC?
Well, I live, let me go, I live in a neighborhood, it's called Foggy Bottom in Washington, D.C. It happens to be the neighborhood where George Washington University is located. In fact, people call it the GW campus here. It's close to the Kennedy Center. It's a nice area. We have DC police here that go around in their patrol cars, occasionally walk the streets, but that's very rare when you see them. They have their guns, they looking for problems, etc. But we also have another police force here. We have the GW police, the campus police here that patrols the streets. And between the two police forces, the campus police is the one that does the most good for our community. Why is that the case? And we don't even pay for that. I mean, GW does, but these men and women do not carry guns, first of all, no guns at all. If you really believe in getting rid of firearms, I think you have to start with the police. And GW police have done that. Secondly, they never get undercover. You respect the GW police. They never take off their uniform and say, oh, we're going to pretend to be students now and try to sell them drugs or go to pot parties or drug parties. And they never do that. Their concern is one thing, to just make a presence in the community and keep people safe. And we think the DC police should do the same thing. So we would get rid of their weapons, like the English do. I mean, there'd be specialized units with weapons if we need to call them out. We would get rid of undercover work completely. Give the police a presence there, give people a respect for the police. Let's not put them in the position of lying and being part of the underworld. It's not necessary. It's only necessary if you make crimes that are personal crimes without victims. If you have victims, you can always, the victims, like if someone steals from you your car, breaks in your car, you're a victim. You can report to the police. But if you're, doing cocaine or smoking pot, who is the victim here? I mean, if a friend of yours, you make a friend and the friend said, oh, you use cocaine, and all of a sudden that friend turns out to be a police officer, and you're arrested, what is the purpose of that? You notice, I don't know if you can see my shirt here, but it says Prison Art Gallery, Prisons Foundation. I happen to be, that's my current position, I happen to be head of the Prisons Foundation. We work with men and women in prison to give them a second chance. And so many of these people are there for victimless crime, mostly drug crimes, and it's a terrible situation. We're putting strikes against them, and we would reduce by our program of less regulation, less getting rid of victimless crimes and victimless crime registration legislation. We would reduce the population in prison, and we can use that money for other programs that really help people.
Yeah, no, I think that's fantastic that you're,
Yeah,
so you're practicing what you preach, which,
yeah,
obviously in
absolutely.
politics, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So you deregulation seems to be the biggest pillar of your run. So
Right.
how does that factor into, economic development and bringing jobs to DC, and things like that? Could you talk a little bit about that?
Well, sure. If you have, if you have less government regulation, less control, and I hate to keep on harping back on that. And part of what I'm saying, of course, is decriminalization as well. I remember going back, this goes back many years, some decades, when we were arguing, just like we're talking now, and people were saying to me, well, you really think homosexuality should be decriminalized? And I said, certainly, because what goes on, while you and I may not be in that category, or we may be, what businesses do we have of that? And people couldn't quite understand it. The churches were very much for keeping that regulation. It's a sin. People have to go to jail for that. But one of the arguments that was made, oddly enough, was that, oh, if we make gayness, homosexuality, not a crime, all the gays in the country will come to Washington, to our city, to practice their disgusting thing. And I said, well, so what? This brings more economic development, I said, and the same thing goes with these other forms of deregulation. It's the same thing. We would bring economic development here because, for example, movie companies that want to come in and shoot movies, they hate the regulations. They want minimal regulations, and they will avoid cities that have excessive regulations and come to those that do not. That's why so many are going to Canada now, because they have more opportunity. We think that we will bring jobs, we will bring businesses here. We recently in Washington, D.C. lost out on the bid to bring Jeff Bezos and his Amazon operation here, because they couldn't build a building high enough. We had our regulations here about only 10 or 11 stories high. So they ended up going across the river to Virginia. It's right across. You can almost see the river from my window here. And they went there because they did not have the regulations. So that's where the big Amazon complex is being built now. We lost out on that. So we're losing a lot of economic development because of excessive regulations, too much government control. And that's why we feel that this is very important to accomplish this.
Absolutely, yeah. So it seems like their deregulation aspect is kind of gonna trickle down into everything. You know what I mean? It's gonna, yeah. So I guess anything else you would want to talk about? We mentioned a little bit about housing. We mentioned a little bit about public safety and decriminalization. You just
Let's
talked
talk,
about.
let's talk about schools then. I know
Okay,
that's a very
perfect,
important,
perfect.
education is very important thing.
Yes,
We believe very firmly in freedom of choice there in education. Certainly, we want to get the police out of the schools. We feel that, posting the police and making the schools a kind of a mini jails and mini prisons are not the way to encourage students to come in there.
right.
We want the school students and parents to have a choice about what school they would go to. So we feel that is very important. So we're talking about private schools, if they want to go to private schools, which they would get a school voucher for. We're talking about public schools, if that's what they want to do. We're talking about religious schools, if they would rather go to a religious school and still get vouchers for all of that. They will have a choice in all of that. So this would be our, and certainly we believe in student evaluating teachers at all levels. We think that's very important, that the student be the consumer here. The consumer should have a choice. The consumer should have an opportunity to evaluate the services that they receive. And this is our program for educational improvement.
Perfect. Right. Okay. So, and then the only other thing that people and other candidates I'm talking about, and if you don't have anything about this, it's totally fine.
We have something about everything.
Right, right. You know, yeah, you seem to have an answer for everything I've thrown at you so far, so that's good. But is transportation, what are your you know, what's your stance on, public transportation? Are you, for, against, like what do you want to see that look like in DC?
Well, on transportation, we would like to actually see the public transportation made free here in Washington, D.C., including the metro system, including the buses. We feel that that's equivalent to when you charge people to use these methods, you're basically encouraging them to use other methods, cars, automobiles, which create pollution. We would want to encourage people to use public transportation. Right now, and it's generally accepted that you pay for that, we feel it's almost like paying people to use a sidewalk, to have, you walk on the street, you have to pay a toll to go street to street by walking. No, we believe public transportation is a very important, and we would want to encourage that by making it free. There's no reason to keep charging this minimal amount. It's losing money anyway. Let's get more people to ride on it, and businesses will prosper by the economic development. By the way, I'm a bike rider, and I love it. And I like the fact that Washington, D.C., and I would encourage more of that, is building more bike lanes. It's trying to discourage more automobile use. I'm an automobile driver too, owner, but between the two, I really enjoy the bike. Sometimes the automobile is necessary if you're going to long distances, etc. But I would encourage more of that, more walking, more public transportation, more bike use, more bike lanes here in DC.
Great. Yeah, no, I think that's awesome. And then, yeah, anything else that you want to talk about before we end it, go ahead, and I guess the floor is yours. You talked a little about kind of trying to reduce carbon emissions, things like that. I don't know if there's any other proposals that you have, but yeah, anything else that you want to talk about, go ahead.
I think we pretty much have covered everything.
Okay.
I could get into a lot more details about, my own uses of solar energy and different experiments that I have made and uses I made. I encourage all of that. We're going in the right direction on that. I even enjoy doing interviews like this where we don't have to travel and
Right.
use a lot of resources, unnecessarily jam up the city to make meetings with each other. So I think we're all going in the right direction here. And the internet is a wonderful thing, and it's really helping our platform of deregulation. For example, years ago, one of our issues was fighting government censorship. It used to be where, you couldn't watch certain types of movies if they were too provocative. Now all you have to do is click your computer screen. People were going to jail for that back then, for producing those movies, for watching them, for possessing them. So we're certainly going in the right direction, and I'm I'm glad I was a part of this. In fact, I think I mentioned to you, Elliot, in our pre-interview that I was part of the many years ago the Oprah Winfrey show. I
Right,
was
right.
invited on that show, and it was to discuss that issue. Should the government continue to censor what people could watch? And we had a prosecutor facing me on that, and what I said then made complete sense. But no one, very few people really appreciated it, because they said, well, we've always regulated what people can watch. We don't want to, and you remember the groups back then, Women Against Pornography. The pornography is a theory, rape is a practice. I mean, come on, give us a break with all of that. We're not children, we're adults. We can make our own decisions. We have to be responsible for our own actions. So that is what my position is. That is what the Libertarian Party is all about. And I guess I'll conclude with a quote from one of the founding people in the founders of the United States, Thomas Jefferson, who said, that government which governs least governs best. And that's our position.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I really like how, I like doing these interviews a lot more because, so many of these candidates, they say well, first of all, I'm going to stop the recording here before I,
Okay.
go